Hey viewers, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Today I've got a bit of a different video for you. We're going to take a deep dive, and I mean deep, into the C12000 preamp from McIntosh. Released not too long ago. This is their flagship preamp, 2 chassis, and it's got some pretty neat tricks up its sleeve. So in this video we're going to do several things. We're going to crack it open, take a look inside and see how it's made. We're going to talk about its design, features, functionality. Then we're going to do an interview with Ken Zelin, which is one of the people at McIntosh responsible for this beautiful piece. He's going to give us the inside scoop on how it was designed, the history of 2-piece preamps from McIntosh, and a bunch of other really neat information. So we're going to do a video interview with Ken Zelin. Then we're going to fire it up and we're going to show you some of the menus and some of the adjustments for it. And lastly, we're going to compare it to the C1100, which is the outgoing 2-piece preamp from McIntosh. We're going to put them both side by side, compare the connections, tube layout, etc., etc. It's going to be a fun video. It's going to be a long one, but I encourage you to hang on for the ride. Before going any further, it'd be a really solid favor if you could give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the videos, as well as leave me a comment. Our videos have been struggling as of the last couple of months. YouTube has done something where we're not getting the sort of promotion and hits that we used to, and losing a little steam. So it would mean a lot if you could go ahead and leave a comment, tell me about your system, what you like about our videos, what you think of McIntosh. Really just about anything would really go a long way. Thank you. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping first. If you are interested in purchasing a C12000 or really any other McIntosh piece that's new in production, we encourage you to, first of all, support your local dealer. They invest tons of money and effort into carrying this line. It's no small feat, so you know, if you're out of our market and need any of this equipment, please go ahead and use the dealer locator to find someone that can support you. If you're in this tri-state area within reach of our shop, we'd love to earn your business. SkyFiAudio.com is the website where you can purchase just about anything we've got, but these have to be purchased in store. So do make an appointment, come by and check it out. Another thing is you can also skip ahead on this video. I'm going to go ahead and put chapters in it. So if what you're really interested in is just seeing the internals, which a lot of people want to do, go ahead and use the slider and you'll see a chapter pop up telling you exactly what to go to. And there'll also be a chapter for the interview with Ken Zelin, so you can also skip ahead to that. We've got other great videos. We've done a ton of McIntosh pieces. Not lately or recently, I've done a comparison between the MA352 and the 252, which is these sort of hybrid drive integrated amplifiers. I'm going to put a link below so you can see that as well. And also, we're going to talk a lot about tube versus solid state, right? There's tons of opinions out there as to what is better for both preamp and amplification. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are, right? Some people are saying that it should be based on the type of music you listen to, it should be based on the type of speakers. You know, I tend to like a tube preamp with a solid state amplifier. That way I have no limitations in power. But I'd love to know what you think and whether or not you can hear a difference and what your feelings are around what is best. Another thing, sorry about the glare. All this glass front faceplates are incredibly hard to photograph. I am not good at photographing and doing videos, so I try to kind of find a spot where I have the least amount of glare. So apologies ahead of time. So let me jump in. The C12000 is in fact a hybrid drive component. McIntosh has been in a kick lately over the last few years in terms of sort of solving that quandary of like what's best, tubes versus solid state. So a lot of their new products actually include both. And this one actually takes it a little further and lets you choose between solid state and tube output stages. So as far as I'm concerned, or no, this is the first one that gives you that choice, but there are other components, including this MA352, that have this hybrid drive technology. This particular piece uses tubes for the preamp stage and solid state transistors for the output or the power amplifier. And there are a bunch. The 901, which is a hybrid monoblock amplifier. There's a stereo hybrid drive amplifier as well. So it's a really interesting direction that things are going. Essentially, you stop fighting with all the people that want one or the other. Let's give them both. So it's a really neat approach. It's a 2-piece box, meaning that the top box in there, which is right here, is the controller that has the power supply and the smarts and logic chips and all the software needed to run it. And the audio signal only goes through the bit with the tubes in it. That keeps things as pure as possible, keeps the noisy bits away from the quiet and delicate bits, which is a great design intent for preamps. It has 12 inputs. Of 2 of them are phono, which are configurable for both moving magnet and moving coils. So tons and tons of inputs, just about everything you want. I've rarely connected a Mac amplifier or preamp to a very complicated system and wish I had more inputs. They've got it all. You know, pass-throughs for home theaters, you know, balanced and single-ended outputs out the gazoo. Really, we're very well equipped, and most of them are configurable in terms of input type and name convention. So you can configure one of these complicated preamps to really just be what you want in the control menu, right? You flip the switch or the knob for inputs, and if you have 2 sources, that's all you're going to see, and they're going to be properly labeled, so anybody can walk up to it and utilize it, which I love. It's a fully balanced design, which means that the left channel never comes in contact with the right channel. They don't share components, they don't share PC boards, they don't share signal paths. If you were to take a bandsaw and cut this preamp in half, or at least the audio section, you'd end up with still a working preamp, except for the power cord, of course. It only has 1 power cord. All right, so the channels are mechanically isolated as well electronically, and that gives you amazing stereo separation and really, really good purity. The tube complement is a bit different from the outgoing one. It has 3 tubes per channel for the driver stage, and it has a total of 4 tubes for the phono stage. And we'll talk more about that when we crack these open. We're going to look at some schematics as well, so you'll learn more as to what the tubes do. On the solid state side, it uses discretely balanced op amps of the highest quality possible to give you a really highly performing solid state section. For those of you interested, let's take a look at the rest of the system. This is a fairly realistic, super top of the line McIntosh system. There are no duplicates here. Even though this is a showroom, we try to put things that make sense together. So starting with the preamp, the C12000, as you can see, it's the new style with the rack handles. Top of the line CD player, this was just released as well. It's a beautiful piece, the MCD12000. If you want to see a video on this, I'd love to do one for you. Please let me know below. Up here we've got the MP1100. This is their external phono preamp. This might be a little superfluous considering how good the phono section is in this piece, but it's really filling the spot until the new tuner comes out, which we're super excited about. A room correction system. This is the MA252, necessary for our warehouse. It is a big space, as you can see. Not the most ideal environment for listening to these monster XRT 2K speakers. So the room corrector goes a long way into taming down the bass and doing a good job with it. The MPC1500, one of our best-selling pieces. This is their full-featured power conditioner. It's a 60-70 pound monster, necessary to cleanly run all this equipment. Up top we've got an MT5 turntable. This is not the top of the line, this is a step down from it, but still a great performer. The MT10 is not in stock right now. This is a creation of a Technics RS1520 with a cosmetic upgrade to kind of make it match nicely with all the Mac stuff. And then lastly, these monoblocks. This is the Macintosh's biggest monoblock. These are 2,000 watts in a 3 chassis per channel, so you need 6 of these boxes to make things run. Now I know a lot of you are going to say in the comments, this is crazy American stuff, but you know, here in the US, we like it powerful, just like our cars. So, you know, 2,000 watts, why not? It's about as much as we can get out of a 15 to 20 amp electrical circuit. Otherwise, I bet you would go to 3,000 watts. But here it is, a complete Mac system. It's sitting in a boxed furniture shelf unit. This is made here in Brooklyn, beautiful solid wood stuff. And behind here, we've got Macintosh's clock, another really interesting piece. If you need something for your office, this is a great gift. Right now, it's showing the time on hours on the left-hand side and minutes on the right-hand side. We just happen to have one of these 901s here in stock. This is really a monoblock with 2 channels of output. One is tube driven, and this is intended to be used for the mids and highs of a bi-wireable speaker. And then this is the solid state section back here with a fairly complex crossover network system that allows you to just dialing it in. A lot of people have sort of been asking to mix and match, use a tube amplifier for the highs and solid state for the lows. And there are some idiosyncrasies and complexities of doing that with dissimilar brands or dissimilar models. So Mac has made it really easy by putting both things into one massive box. And here it is, the MC901. All right, so that's it for the talking part. Gone over the specs. Now we're going to go over to the Workbench and crack this C12000 open and see what it's made out of. Let's move over there now. All right, so I've got the two pieces set up on my workstation. This is where I do the repairs. And we're going to sort of confirm a lot of things that Ken was talking about. This is the 12,000 preamp. This is where the gain happens, essentially. All the tubes are housed in here, and all the music or signal path flows through this box and this box only. And this is where the magic happens, the fact that the audio signal is sort of restricted to just this box. These are the multi-pin connectors they talk about. They supply what looks like an old school printer port cable or communications cable from the 1980s, but it does have gold-plated pins, and I'm sure they've carefully shielded this. This is where the power for this unit comes from, in these multi-pin connectors, and it is in dual mounted configuration, so this one is entirely for the left channel and the right channel, actually the other way around. Another couple of things worth noting is the connection layout. This is very different from the C1100, where we discussed about the availability of the output to go through the solid state through transistors or through tubes. And these balanced connectors are dedicated for that fact, and this is a bit confusing. So this particular output is dedicated for solid state, and this one is dedicated for tube, left and right channels opposing. So again, slice it down the middle, one channel and the second. And then the main outputs in RCA fashion are actually configurable through the front panel. So if you're the kind of guy that wants to sort of test and be able to flip back and forth conveniently, you would not use the balanced, you would use the single-ended and connect your amplifier to it. And then kind of experience live the differences between the solid state and the tube sections. Over here, the inputs are labeled they're numerically labeled 1 through 6, and they're configurable for the front panel. And that's why it doesn't say CD or tuner or aux. You can actually map these through a front panel, which gives you ultimate flexibility. You're not married to a very specific input. Here are grounds for the phono, and phono 1 and phono 2, this has changed as well. Before you had dedicated phono inputs for moving coil and moving magnet. Now they are both infinitely flexible, where phono 1 could be either moving coil or moving magnet, and same for phono 2. So really nice change there as well, and a welcome for installers. Other thing that's notable is this sort of beautiful finish. It's like a gunmetal brushed, feels like stainless steel that's been anodized, or aluminum that's been anodized. I'm not quite sure which of the two. I know the bottom is stainless steel. I suspect that is as well, with some fancy finish on it. Tube complement for the top is dedicated entirely to the phono section. So this is left phono input and left phono output, left phono input, and right phono and input and output. So these 4 tubes are dedicated to the phono section, while the tubes in the front are dedicated to the preamp stage, I suspect. Meters are in this unit, of course. Nice rack handles, a nice addition, and what McIntosh seems to be using for sort of like a design language for their top-of-the-line pieces. MCD 12,000 CD players got them. I think the new tuner does as well, and sort of their amplifiers starting at a specific level, I think at the 462. This is the controller. So this has 2 distinct functions. This is how we sort of manipulate the signal path and choose inputs, volume, etc. Again, no signal going through here, and also the power supply. All the noisy bits, the generate and hum, and interference are housed in this box. Over here we've got, sorry for the glare, A little block diagram that McIntosh has on all their amplifiers and preamps. This is the connector. And here are the tube voltage stages. There's an 18 volt to 6 volt, probably for the filament, 190 volts. So this is essentially like a block diagram for the power supply section, again, left and right. And this is essentially the microcontroller block diagram showing how things are controlled and connected. There's some specifications at the bottom. I'm not going to bore you with that, but let's look at the back. And the other side of this multi-pin connector, I think it's 25 pins. And then the triggers. This is a really nice feature of McIntosh if you haven't worked with them before. They've got triggers to connect all the pieces together. You daisy chain them using 3.5 millimeter cable that lets you essentially power on one piece and subsequently all the other pieces in the chain go on. So you've got that. You've got the very needed pass-through in case you've got a home theater setup. This allows you to essentially bypass the preamp and have a processor as part of your system. It's the only way to really do a good 2-channel / home theater setup. And then data ports. This is how you control other devices through a single remote. You connect them through here. Power cord and a USB port for updates. It's not a DAC. All right, so now let's crack this babies open and see what's inside. And I'm going to fast forward to this part, but please don't do this at home. McIntosh does not want you to break into their equipment. There are high voltages in here, as we saw in the block diagram. There are some voltages exceeding 190 volts DC. That's not good for you. It will feel pretty bad if you get zapped with it. Also, not sure what it means for your warranty, but you certainly want to stay out unless you need to. And I'm doing this for you guys, so you don't have to look inside. All right, here we go. First thing, it is in fact stainless steel, as you can see by the finish. And there's the window for the tubes. And I'll talk about that in a second, because that was well thought out. All right, let's take a peek at this beauty. So first and foremost, we see a partition here separating the left and right channels. This keeps kind of interference between one and the other, and you sort of bleed through it to a minimum. These phono modules stand out. These look like, a potted circuit board dedicated to the phono amplifier. And those relays that Ken was talking about are all here. These black devices here. And you see that, for example, this XLR board has 2 of them for both sides of the wave, and there are a bunch of others throughout. These are probably for the phono section and all different signal paths. See a combination of through-hole and surface mount components, but of the highest quality. These capacitors, metal film resistors, good stuff throughout. Beautiful epoxy boards. Look at that in there. That's interesting. I suspect that's got something to do with the volume control, but we'll look at the schematic and confirm that. Or maybe for the phono loading. That might be our network for setting the loading on the cartridge. There's a really neat enclosure here for the tubes, and it's not only cosmetic, but it kind of keeps the dust away from the tubes and that piece itself. So the top panel is perforated, and dust will get in here. I see a little bit of dust right on the high polished metal, but it's super clean inside the tube slot, which is kind of nice. And yeah, we've got a board here with the 4 phono tubes, and then over here you kind of see the little tips of the rest of the tubes poking throughout. Here are the VU meters, and McIntosh goes through great lengths to color match their meters so that when you buy a bunch of different pieces and you set them up, they don't have just slightly hue difference in color. So these 3 here I suspect are for calibrating the color just right. So I bet you they've got a computer and some sort of optical pickup where they measure the color and do adjustments accordingly. Looks like these two are, one's color, intensity, and meter calibration. So they're right there. And then another notable thing is that the chassis split horizontally into two sections. We've got the audio circuitry at the top, and it's got a sort of waistline right about here where we've got other stuff in the bottom, notably probably the power supply inputs, etc. I don't know exactly what's down there, but we're certainly going to find out. Okay, not much. The bottom panel, so the power distribution is down here and some of the logic, probably for controlling all the micro switches and stuff. And then we see the boards. These two are for the tubes. And then this one here is the headphone. It's got a significantly good headphone stage. And as you can see, this is generally an afterthought for most manufacturers. They'll just drive over the output. They'll put a couple of resistors and maybe volume control over the primary output. Max actually created its own headphone section, and I bet you if you compare the circuitry to some of their headphone amplifiers, their dedicated headphone amplifiers, you'll see a lot in common. So a beautiful job here, and a great value. Sort of, it's an expensive piece, so I'd love to see kind of these sort of added bonus pieces be part of this, where you're getting a really, really good headphone amplifier along with your preamp. So not much else at the bottom. Here's the plate we talked about that splits the preamp into two sections. High quality connectors. And I see there's another USB port in here. So this must be the way you upgrade this piece, and the other one has it in the back. It's worth noting also that McIntosh is one of the few manufacturers where it makes, almost all of their PC boards. When I did the factory tour, you could actually see all these being assembled and wave soldered, with a few exceptions. I suspect maybe like a USB or a network card might be a third-party built, or maybe an HDMI board where it's not in their best interest to produce. But everything else, I mean, even this headphone board and control boards, everything is made here in the USA, which is really nice to see nowadays. All right, so now let's go break into the controller. All right, so now we are in the top of the controller, and we see the two transformers, again, probably staying true to the dual mono configuration. We've got AC to AC transformers right here, going into a distribution board. It's got some logic in here. All the jacks for the 12-volt triggers come into here. There's a little transformer here. If Ben was here, he'd probably tell us exactly what it is. I'm going to make two guesses. It's either for the driving the filaments on the tubes, or maybe the 12-volt section throughout. And what we're missing here is a bunch of capacitors. So I suspect they're going to be on the other side, which we'll have a look. The front board, again, this is a chip probably for driving the display. And not much else. Some backlighting stuff. I see a bunch of diodes and LEDs and things for lighting that back panel. Okay, let's flip it over. Okay, as expected, here's the other half of the power supply. So the transformers are on the inverse side, and here are the rectification and filtration stages. So these are all the caps. These look to be about 3,500 microfarads, a bunch of them. So this form factor is a lot better than having one large capacitor. So they're able to fit in a pretty small chassis. See some drivers in here for the power supply, and tons of power supply stages. As you can imagine, we need different voltages for just about every different circuit. So this multi-pin connector will distribute them to the right places, and then out the connector in the back. IC socket here on the right, and I see some fins in here, or some slots to allow some sort of convection cooling. This is going to be the hotter part. Well, actually the tube section is going to be hotter. But again, getting some airflow through here using just convection flow is a nice way to do it. Mac stuff comes with significant feet at the bottom. It gives you at least 3/4 of an inch clearance, so you can get some good heat dissipation. So that's about it for the internals. All right, so I got a little more clarity on the layout of this audio stage here. So in fact, this is the network that allows you to do all this selection for the moving coil and moving magnet, loading, capacitance, etc. It's all happening in here with these transistors, resistors. Then it goes into this low noise amplifier. From there, here are output relays, and then it goes into our tube stage where it is buffered. So it's sort of a hybrid phono section in here. If we look at the schematic, we've got our input signal coming in here. Here's the, this is just left channel only. We've got the selection for the cartridge here, and then we go into these modules where we've got some op amps and some more gain stages. And then from there goes into the tube section. Here we go, where we see the two tubes. Here's one, and this is number two. And essentially two buffered stage with feedback loop and some RI-AA equalization right there. So that is all contained within these four tubes, left channel, right channel. Also worth noting, the volume control itself is being done right here at this chip, again in dual mono, and that is a Muses 72320, which is a high quality volume control commonly used in these pieces. Here's the spec sheet for it. So it is signals going through that volume control, and it's being controlled electronically or digitally. Worth noting the dual mono design. Super sweet on the power supply all the way throughout the unit. I think the only board that is actually being shared at any given point is this board that is holding the tubes, but it is just mechanically connected. There's no electronic connection between the two pieces. Hey, thanks for joining us, Ken. For those of you that don't know Ken, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, Ken Zelin. I am the Global Training Director for McIntosh. Been involved with McIntosh for a little while, since about 1972. So my job is to be able to explain to salespeople how to explain to customers what McIntosh is all about. That's my job.
Yeah, we just got back from training at McIntosh, and Ken did an amazing job bringing us up to speed. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring him into the mix on this discussion around the C12000, which is the latest flagship preamplifier from McIntosh, and the replacement for the C1100, which I'm pretty familiar with. So we're going to just do a quick Q&A, and then Ken's going to give us some behind-the-scenes sort of info and how the development of the C12000 happened and all that, to give you guys a bit more value. Maybe first, let's just talk a little about what it replaces, about the C1100, and what the biggest differences were within that.
Sure. Well, the 1100 was a very successful preamp for us. It's a tube preamp without any noise. I shouldn't say without any, virtually no noise. So the C1100 was a totally balanced preamp, meaning that for every transistor or capacitor or resistor or tube that's in it, there's a complementary one that cancels the noise of the first one. So what we developed with the C1100 was a virtually noiseless, virtually distortionless tube preamp. And of course, everyone wants that tubeliciousness of sound that tubes give you, that warm, round, great long-term listenability. But in the past, you always had to put up with a little extra noise and distortion. And the C1100 took care of that, did away with that. The C12000 is based on the 1100. We did a few things. Since it's our top-of-the-line premier preamp, we added handles to the front, so the bass response is better. Of course, I'm kidding, but anything that has handles on it, everyone will always say has better bass. It's some psychological thing. So it'll sound like it has better bass.
It's also better for your back, right?
Well, yeah, when you have to lift it, much better. We also changed the output section of it. So normally it has a tube output section, but for those who want a little bit less tubeliciousness, you can also use on the back of it, there's a solid state output. Because we used to offer, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, a previous model in either tube or solid state form, the C1000.
That
And
was
most
the pre-chassis piece, right? That's when you could buy the transformer and controller in one box, and you could choose between a tube box or a solid state box, right? So essentially three pieces.
Yep, you could choose to buy either the solid state or the tube or both and have a three-piece preamp, because it is legitimate to say certain recordings might sound better on solid state and certain recordings might sound better on tubes. If you're really what I would call a hardcore audiophile, that's a choice you want to make. Now on the C12000, the output section, the final buffer section, we have two of them in there, one tube and one solid state, and you can pick between the two. And we also improved the phono section. So in the past, we always had two phono inputs, one for moving magnet cartridges and one for moving coil cartridges. And then at the engineering meeting, we were sitting there and discussing, well, wouldn't it be nice if a customer could have two of the same? They might have two moving magnet cartridges. So maybe there's a automatic turntable for the family and kids to use, and then a very high-end turntable with a fairly delicate moving coil cartridge that really only a couple of family members are allowed to use, because if you accidentally had the stylus, cleaned it with your finger because you didn't know any better, that would be a pretty serious and costly error. So we redesigned the phono section so that it had two phono inputs, but either or both could be moving magnet, optimized for high output moving coil or low output moving coil. So on each one, you can adjust the gain, the amount of amplification, the capacitance for a moving magnet cartridge, or the input impedance or resistance for a moving coil. So you can have two different types of turntables or two of the same, anything you want. Now, the irony of all this is when we got done designing the new phono section, it was simpler than the old, less flexible phono section, which of course meant that the noise went down even further and the performance went up. So it does more, costs us less to make, and offers better performance. So it's a win-win for everyone, which is one reason why the C12000 didn't have to go up radically in cost compared to the C1100.
I noticed that for our clients, whenever we sold a turntable with dual tone arms, it was very rare that a client wanted at that level a moving coil and a moving magnet input on his preamp, right? So this is really a welcome solution. They're likely to have dual moving coils or a mono and a stereo cartridge. So the C1100's phono section was always a bit compromised. Now, it also gives them the ability to tune this via remote control, which is also a great feature, right?
Oh, yeah, because the idea of a lot of preamps have adjustable phono loading, and it's often little dip switches on the back or inside. And the idea of playing a piece of music and then getting up and raising your tone arm and moving it back and flipping a dip switch after turning the volume down and turning the volume back up and then resetting the stylus and trying to decide if it sounds better or not, you've got to have a better memory than I have. So now you can hold up your remote and change the phono loading while the music is playing by remote control from your seat with digital readout on the front of the preamp to show you the result, which is just spectacular. And then if you're really into it, you can get a frequency response record. There are a few available, and use the meters on the preamp to actually check the frequency response when you get done. And the meters are also fantastic for setting the azimuth of the phono cartridge
Yes.
with the right test records. Yep. You get
Yeah,
a short test record and you can get the azimuth perfect.
yeah, I don't know if you know this, but our test bench, I have a specific bench here that is used for calibrating turntables, and I have a McIntosh preamp on there for that calibration process because of the meters. They're extremely helpful in
Yes.
dialing in a cartridge. Now, you touched on something before, which was the price difference between the C1100 and the C12000. Now, that's about a $2,000 spread from the old version, correct?
That sounds about right. At
So you're
my
getting
age,
quite a
I'm not
value.
remembering
Yeah.
prices per.
So quite a value. You're getting essentially to not have to pick between solid state and phono section for only an incremental amount from the outgoing version, which is really
Exactly.
nice. Okay. Now, also, this the other very visible difference is the tube count. Can you talk a bit about that? I think we've dropped a pair of tubes in the process of going from the old to the incoming product. Where does that come from?
Yeah, that just comes from the switching that we used. We used to use a set of tubes for moving magnet, a set of tubes for moving coil.
Right.
Now, with this new switching system, and I haven't looked at the schematic, but it requires 2 tubes fewer. So that's a really nice thing.
So simplicity always wins in tube preamp design, right?
Yeah, simplicity is always good.
Yeah.
The fewer the parts, the less noise you generally have.
Okay, now I've also noticed some confusion on the internet on the ability to choose or connect solid state output versus tube output. So let me see if I have this correct. I've done my research. I think I've got it. I need your expert seal of approval.
Okay.
There are at least 4 sets of outputs on the back of the preamp, right? I think 2 are XLR and 2 are RCAs. One set of XLRs is dedicated for tube, right?
Yes.
And one set of XLRs is dedicated for solid state.
Right. So
So
if
far,
you
so
want
good?
to switch between those using XLR, you would pull out the cables and move them to the other
Right.
jacks.
Yet there's a set of RCA outputs that is configurable through the front panel for either tube or solid state. Is that right?
Right. Now, on that preamp, we ran out of real estate, as we always say in the engineering department. Right. Couldn't put on multiple sets of balanced and RCA outputs because we ran out of room. So if you're using unbalanced connections, you can switch by remote control even between tube and solid state on the fly. If you're using balanced outputs, you need to move the cable.
Okay. Does that mean it's a little bit more compromised, the switchable output, that it has to go through an extra set of, contacts or relays? Or
not a bit.
For the purist, what are you going to do?
Okay, so it's all the switching in the C12000 and the 1100 and the ones before that are electromagnetic switching. So there's several types of switches available. One is a good old mechanical selector switch. Typically used to be a knob that you would turn, like on a C28 McIntosh preamp, which was super popular in the 1970s. The problem with a mechanical switch is that from the day it's manufactured, the contacts start getting dirty and corroded. And eventually, someone will always call you up. I'm sure you've heard this call a million times. My left speaker isn't working. I'm about to have a party. What can I do? And we used to tell people, push every button and turn every knob on the front of your C28 preamp 5 times. And then let me know what happens. And they'd come back to the phone and they'd say, oh my God, it's fixed. Well, no, it's not fixed. There was corrosion or dirt in one of the contacts and you've temporarily pushed the dirt aside. But it's going to go bad again. You've got to clean the contacts periodically. Now, the good thing about mechanical switching is the day it's made, before it gets dirty or corroded on the contacts, it has 0 distortion. So it's perfect when new and then needs cleaning periodically. The C32, C33, 34, 35, those all had electronic switching using transistors or FETs. And that did a whole bunch of things for us. It made the switch be able to stay right at the input or output jack at the back panel, simply controlled by a knob or button on the front. But we actually brought the switch to the music, not the music to the switch. So much less wiring inside. The other big advantage to electronic switching is it never needs cleaning. It's sealed in a transistor. Now, the downside is it has a smidge of distortion. Very, very little, but a little bit. FETs are not completely linear. So like our C31, which had electronic switching, had a distortion level of 0.007. Really good, but not as good as it would have been with mechanical switching the first day. The good news is it never gets worse. Well, we don't do either of those two things anymore. We now use electromagnetic switching. It's placed right next to the jack. And the contacts are ruthenium, which is better than gold. It's the best contact material known to man. So it is a mechanical switch. Now, what are we going to do about the dust problem? We seal it in a glass cylinder so dust can't get in.
Yeah, it's vacuum sealed.
Right. And then we actually, after we pull out the oxygen, the company that makes these for us, they put argon gas in it, which is inert. So there can be no corrosion. Okay. So we now have a mechanical switch with zero distortion that won't get worse with age. They're spec'd to not leach enough oxygen through the plastic and metal and glass for about the first 175 years. And by then I'll be retired. So I just lie to everyone and tell them they're good forever. But 175 is a pretty long time. So now we have noiseless, distortionless switching. So we can add any features we want. We could have as many inputs as we want. And we're not putting more wiring inside the preamp because the switching is done right at the jack. It's really cool. And we first started doing that with the C37. That was our first preamp with 002% distortion, which is as low as we can accurately measure repeatedly.
Yes, we've noticed that. We restore here at SkyFi tons of preamps throughout all the decades, and it's a notable difference once you went to those sort of devices in terms of reliability. Now, on the subject of noise, talk to me about the CMMR, the common mode rejection. Why is that important in this piece?
Okay, it works just like balanced cables or noise-canceling headphones. So if you're going on a plane and you don't want to hear the engine noise, you'll put on your pair of noise-canceling headphones. And they work on the theory that if you have a wave that goes up and down, and then you add to that a wave that goes down and up of the same width and height, in other words, frequency and volume level, the two will cancel and you'll have nothing left. It's like a tug of war between two people. The flag stays right in the middle. Okay. Noise canceling headphones, the way they work is some of the noise gets through the ear pad and hits your ear from the engine. But there's also a microphone on the outside of the headphone that picks up the same noise, flips the wave upside down, and feeds that out of the speaker in the headphone. And since it's upside down from the first wave, it cancels out. That's how balanced cables work. With a balanced cable, we have three conductors. We have a ground, music, and upside down music going through the cable. And at the end of the cable, we flip the upside down music upside down again. We add it to the music. You end up with twice the signal and the noise cancels. That's what we're doing in the C12000 and its predecessors. For every part that's inside, there's a complementary part inside. We're feeding music through inverted And when we invert again and add together, the signal doubles and the noise cancels. It's very cool.
Just like an XLR cable, right? Just like a balanced system.
Just like a balanced cable and just like noise canceling headphones.
Terrific. On that note, what is the headphone section like in the C12000?
As good as we can make it with the space we have available inside.
Okay.
So there's a separate, we don't just run off the preamp outputs and we don't just run through a chip. There's an actual discrete set of transistors for the headphones.
Okay.
We gave it enough strength for even pretty power hungry headphones and yet noise low enough for really efficient headphones.
Okay.
It's not as good as our separate MA252 headphone amp, but that one has output transformers for the headphone. That just wasn't going to happen in a preamp. Short of that, this is a really good headphone amp.
Terrific. Well, on the subject of noise, I compared the specifications or performance figures, C1100 to C12000, did not see very much in there in terms of signal to noise ratio, frequency range, etc. I did see some improvements on the phono stage, specifically on the moving magnet. What else happened in the box? So we got a solid state front end output. What else are we getting in this?
Yep. So handles, solid state versus tube, better phono. Those are the three changes.
Right.
You won't see the basic specs change much, even if we did improve things, because not every reviewer has as good test equipment as we have.
Right. We
once submitted an amplifier to a magazine and they said, we claimed 0.005% distortion and they measured 0.01. And then further investigation, we found out that the oscillator they were using was spec'd for 0.1%. So distortion itself. So of course, sometimes things are getting so good today that only a few people have the ability to confirm accurately what the products do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So why would you select? In other words, what criteria do you use for selecting the tube output versus the solid state? I'm an average audiophile. I'm sitting in my living room. What is it? Is it speaker-based, amplifier-based, recording-based? Why do we want both?
I think it's recording-based. If I'm playing Sonny Rollins' Way Out West, that was recorded in 1957. It's probably going to sound better on tubes because they used tubes when they made the recording. If I'm playing the Doobie Brothers, Toulouse Street, I might prefer solid state because you just know that they had solid state amps when they made that recording.
Okay.
And now a lot of studios are actually going back to using tube amps to evaluate recordings. So on new recordings, it's hard to say. Okay. So one thing you can do is just mark each recording with a little note, a TU or a TR for tubes or transistors.
Okay.
I do have to say, if someone's my age, I'm about to be 66, if they don't hear a big difference between the tube and solid state output, it doesn't mean it's anything serious. I no longer hear out to 16,000 hertz in the highs. I can hear out to about 12,000 hertz. So the difference between the two sections is getting harder for me to hear. So I'm relying on younger people like you to tell me what you hear sometimes.
Okay, good. And then in terms of what's a good, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, I was going to ask if you want me to go through the history of our multi-piece preamps. I don't know if you have time for that today. That'll be up to you.
Yeah, I do.
So the story of our two-piece preamp really starts with the MC1000. The MC1000 was our first quad balanced power amp that canceled its own noise and distortion. At the time, we called it double balanced. We hadn't trademarked the term quad balanced yet, but it's the same thing. So he came out with the C1000. Gordon Gao, who was head of McIntosh at the time, brings it to the Japanese hi-fi show. It won product of the year. It won all sorts of awards. Everyone loved it. But the importer, the distributor for McIntosh in Japan, said to Gordon Gao, you need a high-end preamp to go with it. Gordon said, what are you talking about? We've got the C34V. It's a great preamp. And the distributor said, but it's not expensive enough to go to the MC1000. It doesn't have a moving coil input for high-end turntables, and it doesn't have balanced connectors. So you need to produce a more high-end preamp than that. They wanted it to be in two boxes, one with the power supply and one with the preamp, because that's what Levinson and Krell and a lot of other companies were doing. And in order to gain respect in the ultra high-end community, it had to be in two boxes, had to have balanced in and outs, and had to have moving coil phono. Well, at the time, we had a moving coil cartridge, and we had a separate moving coil phono preamp called the MCP1, which was unbelievably advanced. Just for fun, this is the inside of it. We're talking about 1970s, and this is a product with a digital switching power supply, so it wouldn't hum. It was an analog preamp with a digital switching power supply. Pretty incredible stuff. But they wanted the moving coil section in the preamp. So this, you've probably never seen anything like this. This was the original C100 prototype. And it was a two-box design, as the distributor requested, with the power supply in a separate box and everything else in what looked like the preamp. And it was totally balanced from input to output, so it canceled its own noise. And it had a moving coil phono section in it. And it almost went to market like this, but I think it was Larry Fish, who at the time was heading up preamp design. He realized last minute it's wrong. He just did what all the competitors did. The power supply is in one box and everything else is in the other box. It may be what everyone else is doing, but what everyone else is doing is wrong, because there's several things that produce noise in a preamp. One is the power supply. Two is the digital display, that where it's reading out the volume at minus 29.5. And the third thing is the microprocessor. Individually, they don't produce much noise, but if you're trying to produce the world's quietest preamp, you don't want that to happen. So what we actually came out with was this, and this is something you've seen before. This is the C100 preamp, and the bottom box is not the power supply. The bottom box is a preamplifier. All preamplification takes place in that box. The upper box contains the power supply, the remote control sensor, the digital display, the microprocessor, and all the controls and switches, everything that could conceivably cause noise. And this was an incredible product. When it came out, we used to have fun. We'd say to people, take a look at the back of it. And they look at the back of the top component and say, well, there's no inputs and outputs. Well, that's not the preamp. That's the controller. The ins and outs are on the bottom piece. So it added to confusion, but people eventually understood this is the way to build a super high-end preamp. So the inputs and outputs are on what looks like the power supply, but that's a pure preamplification box.
And that stayed true all the way to today, right? The C12000 is the same configuration. So if I were to flip this thing around, I would see essentially the same out configuration, right?
Yes, you'd see all the ins and out jacks on the top box, which you thought was the power supply box. the opposite of intuition. This was also completely balanced. So every signal that came in, if it wasn't balanced, was converted right near the jack to a balanced signal. Because once the signal's converted to balance, it's like having a coat of armor around it to prevent noise from getting in. The next generation was the C200, and the C200 had a better display and a better volume control and a few improvements. Then we went to the C1000, where everything was not only totally balanced, but dual mono. So completely separate everything for the left and right channels. And you always bought the controller, which is the piece in the front, and you bought either tube or solid state for your preamplification. Those are the units in the back. And if you wanted to go all the way, you bought all three, and we had this complex method so you could actually switch on the fly with your line level sources between tubes and solid state. It was a cable manufacturer's dream.
Twice as many cables, right?
Oh, yeah. You had to split the outputs of everything you had to two preamps.
Right.
This was the first one that was dual mono. And if we look inside of it, you can see everything is completely separate for the right and left channels. And just to show you how crazy we went on this, this cable here, can you see my cursor?
Yeah, the grounding cable.
That cable that goes across is the mono cable that joins the two channels when you want to go to mono.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And we not only use the ruthenium contact argon filled glass encapsulated switches at the end, but we put a switch at each end of that cable. So when you're back in stereo, you don't have a couple of dB of leakage from right to left, but not left and right because you only disconnected one end. We actually disconnect both ends of the cable.
So you don't end up with an antenna. You've got essentially a fully disconnected cable.
Exactly. Just really cool.
Yeah,
next was the C1100. And by that point, we realized that 90% or 80% of our sales on the C1000 was the tube output section. Right. So we made this only tube output. And then now with the C12000, we're back again to giving you a choice because we're able to do that easily. So but you don't have to buy three pieces.
Understood.
So you're always listening through tubes, but the final output section, you have a choice between tubes and solid state. And that's the crazy history of this preamp dating back to the first thoughts.
Terrific stuff. Now, you've got inside knowledge as to what sells. If you take a step down below this, I think you would be at the C2700 for a tube preamp. And then the C53, is that right, for the solid state?
Yes, a C53 is a solid state version of our super popular C2700.
So which sells better? What do McIntosh fans look for? Are they looking for tubes? Or are they looking for solid state at that price point in a preamp?
Most people want the tubes. They want that tubeliciousness of sound,
right?
But they don't want to sacrifice volume capability. So a lot of people choose a solid state power amps. They'll have lots of power,
right?
But a tube preamps will get the tubeliciousness. On the other hand, there are some people who simply don't want to deal with replacing tubes, even if they might last a dozen years. And you could get a dozen years off of preamp tubes. I mean,
we see it all the time.
Yeah. But there's some people who just don't want to deal with that. People who might live overseas, people who are just non-technical, and maybe they live in a rural area where there's not a dealer around them. So we do sell a fair number of C53s because it's pretty maintenance free being all solid state. And it has the 8-band equalizer, which we can't do on a tube preamp because 8-band equalizer would need
a lot of tubes.
we could probably need 80 tubes to duplicate the circuit we're using that's noise canceling, and it would just get out of control.
Okay. Well, thank you for that insight. I appreciate it. Anything else to add? Or are we wrapping up here, Ken? Do you have anything else that you want to chime in about the 12,000?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Well, listen, it's been a terrific, fun time. Thanks for your incredible expertise and breadth of knowledge. I do appreciate it, Ken.
My pleasure. Well, let's do this again soon.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, Ken. Thank you so much. Okay, now I'm going to power up and go through a few of the menu settings. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire setup procedure. I'm just going to go and sort of showcase the differences or the additions from the 1100. So I'm going to power on. This is pretty neat. The tubes glow with artificially with LEDs. They glow orange during the warm-up procedure, and then they eventually change color to indicate either an OK status or some sort of fault within the tubes. So now we've got it'll turn green. You can, on the meters, obviously you can turn them off in case you are in a darkened room and don't want to be bothered by it all. But generally the same cosmetics as the C1100 with the difference of the handles. And we'll compare the two. I've got an 1100 we've pulled out just to show you the differences. In the menu, we've got a trim button here. And sorry for the glare, Mac stuff is super hard to film. And I am not a professional. So I wanted to confirm, first of all, the ability to switch between solid state and tube output stages. And that is done through a quick and easy adjustment of the trim knob here on the left. So here we have the ability to turn on and off output 1, output 2, and selecting the main output between tube and solid state. So here it is, as simple as that. And as we do that, relays are clicking and things are happening internally to switch that. And as I mentioned earlier, the only output that is configurable through the front panel for tube and solid state is this main output, which is sitting right here. This balanced solid state is dedicated, and so is this balanced tube output. So to adjust the phono settings themselves and to confirm that we have the ability to go moving coil and moving magnet on both, if we go to phono 1 here and go through the trim adjustments, we've got the ability to here alter resistance and capacitance right there, as well as gain. And we should have the same thing if we go to phono 2. Yep. That's about it in terms of functionality. If you're not familiar with a C1100 or a 12,000, a long hold of the setup button gets you into the sort of deeper settings within it, where we'll see the ability to mess with triggers, infrared codes, serial connections, etc., as well as assign the pass-through. You can also rename the inputs, which is a really nice feature. It wasn't always the case, but Mac seems to have gone that way with all their products now. So it is defaulted balance 2. I could call that, for example, streamer or anything else I wanted at this point. Okay, so I've got them both side by side. On the right, we've got the C1100, and on the left, I've got the C12000. Chassis-wise, it's almost identical. There's only some subtle changes here, if at all. They've omitted the digital preamp connection on the new model. I guess that wasn't readily used. Pretty much everything else is the same. Power connections and all the jack layout is pretty much identical. The only difference is what we've discussed earlier about some outputs being labeled for solid state and some are labeled for tubed. So this is the outputs 1 and 2 on the C1100 and outputs 1 and 2 on the C12000. No differences other than that. Cosmetically in the front, you'll notice not just the rack handles, but also the tube complement. I'm not going to lift them up, but actually, yeah. The quantity of tubes on the 12,000 for the phono stage is different from the C1100, and that they were able to reduce it by allowing the tubes and the inputs for the phonos to be configurable for both moving coil and moving magnets. So they added some transistors and some control logic in order to be able to use tubes more efficiently and not have to dedicate one set for moving coil and one set for moving magnet. which is what they think we had here. Let's look at. So this has been cut down to 4 tubes on the C12000. And yes, in fact, we've got the left moving magnet, and a dedicated left moving magnet, and a dedicated left moving coil. And this tube in particular was shared by both, I believe. So even though it has less tubes, it's actually not a downgrade. It's really a better utilization of what is in the machines. All right, so that wraps it up. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of fun to make. Oh, and one last thing. I've got here a Symbol Audio custom rack made for McIntosh that perfectly houses all the McIntosh components. It even has a backlit LED emblem on the right-hand corner, solid walnut, made here in the USA, distributed by McIntosh dealers, including ourselves. So if you want one of these are listed on our website at skyfiaudio.com. It's an absolutely gorgeous piece, and I encourage you to look at this. I did a video recently on it. I'll put a link below as well. I think it was the last video I just did. So if you want to watch that, go ahead and go into the comments or check out our channel for SkyFi on YouTube. Our website, skyfiaudio.com, where you can see all this crazy stuff listed in one spot. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching, and stay in touch.